Hi everyone, welcome back. We're reading The Mostly True Adventures of Homer P. Figg by Rodman, Philbrick. Today we're doing chapter 14, The Hungry Mouse. When we last finished, it almost seems like Homer's wrapped up what I think of as his first adventure as he helped the runaway slaves escape toward Canada, as he helped free them all. Chapter 14, The Hungry Mouse. So he was talking about leaving, but he got swept up by Mrs. Bean right before he could leave. There must be something about a goose-down mattress that makes you dream of things that can't be true. Like our parents are still alive in our little house, and my father smoking his long clay pipe by the fire, and our dear mother's reading me and Harold a story from a book she holds in her lap. The story is about an Indian scout and his adventures in the deep forests. There's another story about a funny little man who goes to sleep for 100 years in a cave. Or maybe that's a story Harold told me later, because the dream's fading, and I can't hold it no matter how hard I try. Morning at Jebediah Brewster's house. The sun comes up like warm honey, and I can smell whatever Mrs. Bean is cooking for breakfast. Something with baked apples and brown sugar and cinnamon. I hate to get out of bed. I've never been in anything so soft or cozy. Makes me want to fall back asleep and find that dream where my parents are still alive and Harold is safe and wars are in storybooks from a long time ago. I could do it too. Mr. Brewster wants me to stay. He says a 12-year-old boy has no business chasing an army on the way to war. And I can stay here and help him with the Underground Railroad. He says that getting beat by a colored man is so humiliating, smelt and stink will never bother us again, and there are still wagon loads of fugitives who need help. Part of me really wants to do it. Wants to forget about my brother and live in the lap of luxury and get fat on pancakes and apple pie and pork cutlets and pan-fried chicken and ginger cookies with sugar on top. Maybe go back to Pine Swamp one day, riding in a fine carriage and dressed like a gentleman. Show old Squint what became of that ragged boy he kept in the barn like an animal. But no matter how hard I try, I can't forget my brother Harold, marching to war on his bare feet without even a real gun, sleeping on the cold, hard ground without enough to eat, nor clean water to drink, and sickness everywhere. He's so brave and honorable and careless of himself that he'll get killed for sure, and it'll be my fault for not trying hard enough to save him. Mrs. Bean is stuffing me with scrambled eggs and fried potatoes and apple crisp when Mr. Brewster looks into the kitchen and says, "Good morning, Homer. Has thee decided?" "Let the boy have his breakfast in peace," says Mrs. Bean, shaking a spatula in his direction. "Oh, thee is right, of course. My apologies," he says, retreating. "No," I call out. "Wait." Mr. Brewster comes into the kitchen looking at me kindly but sort of worried. Mrs. Bean just shakes her head and sighs and then pretends to fuss at the stove. "My brother is my whole family," I tell him. "They tricked him and sold him like they sell a slave." "And thee means to find thy brother no matter what?" "Yes, sir, I must." "How will thee find him?" Mr. Brewster wants to know. "Oh, first, I'll try and locate Bob the horse." Mr. Brewster looks thoughtful. "Assuming thee locates Bob the horse, then what?" "Oh, I've got it all planned, except for all the nagging details. Ride south until I find the army," I tell him. "That's it?" he says doubtfully. "Ride south and hope for the best?" "I can follow south," I assure him. "Don't need a compass to follow south if you know where the sun rises and where it goes down." "And if I said thee were but a child and must stay here under my guardianship?" Lying to Jebediah Brewster doesn't work, so I tell him the truth. "I'm grateful for your kindness, but I'll run away. I must." He nods his great white head like he already knew the answer. The old horse is in the stable. It has been curried and watered and given hay and oats. "Bob the horse is alive!" Good old Bob! I can't wait to see him, and I jump up from the table before the apple crisp is gone. Sit thee down, Mr. Brewster says, very stern. Finish the food that has been blessed in this house. Yes, sir, I say, slumping back into the chair. But Bob, the horse will keep. Indeed, he will keep very well, while thee journey by train and steamship to New York. Steamship? I ask, puzzled. New York? Mr. Brewster looks at Mrs. Bean, who is still fretting by the stove, pretending that she doesn't care what foolishness we're talking about. I have made certain inquiries, he says, sounding very grave and serious. Remember, inquiries is just a fancy word for question. So made certain inquiries means just that he's asked questions to find out information. Men recently enlisted in the state of Maine will stop in New York before joining up with the Union Army. It's likely thy brother will be among them and that he will have been transported on a troop train or possibly by steamship. Certainly it is much too far to travel by horse. Suddenly I get a picture in my mind of Harold on a train with hundreds of other soldiers. He's never been on a train before. Will he be scared or excited? Likely both, knowing Harold. Here, I'd been thinking he would have to march all the way to the war. But trains make more sense, if the whole point is getting to men where the shooting starts as quick as possible. Does it cost a lot to get there? I ask. I could sell you Bob. He's a good old horse. Mr. Brewster smiles. Well, the animal is certainly old, I'll grant thee that much. Never mind the cost of the journey. I will provide it gladly. And if I were not so urgently occupied here, I would accompany thee myself. But I dare not leave Ebenezer Smelt may be gone, but there are like-minded men who will take his place. Oh, I'll be fine, I say grandly. Don't you worry about Homer Figg. That makes Mrs. Bean roll her eyes, but at least she's smiling. No, says Mr. Brewster. I cannot in good conscience let thee proceed alone. I have arranged to have a young Methodist clergyman act as thy guardian. He will be supplied with sufficient funds to buy thy brother out of enlistment. Supplied with sufficient funds? So this young, it's kind of like a priest in a way. It's somebody that is looking for his own church to be a preacher in. It sounds like somebody that Mr. Brewster is trying to help out. That's who will be the guardian. Supplied with sufficient funds means he'll be given enough money to buy Harold back out of the army. It all sounds good to me, better than good, because I get to see what a train looks like and ride a steamship, and Harold gets out of the army. Oh, then we'll both come back to live with Mr. Brewster, and I'm pretty sure that he won't make us sleep in the barn. Sitting in that warm and wonderful kitchen, it seems like all my dreams are about to come true. Uh-oh. Of course, if I had known what was going to happen, I'd have taken Bob the horse, or my own 2 feet, anything but get on that train. Trouble is, I had no more sense than a hungry mouse. I saw the cheese and never paid attention to the trap. Trap by the name of Willow, the Reverend Webster B. Willow. Chapter 15 is called Train to Glory. Soon after breakfast, my new guardian shuffles into the drawing room, walking like he's got something sticky on his boots that makes it hard to lift his feet from the floor. He's tall and thin, with narrow shoulders not much wider than his head, and long skinny arms that shoot past his frayed cuffs. He's wearing an old black frock coat, short at the waist, and trousers that shine at the knees, and a crooked stovepipe hat that bumps against the door frame as he enters the room. So all of his clothing is kind of old or shabby or too small for him. So that just tells us a little bit about him, that definitely doesn't have a lot of money for sure. Oh, pardon me, sirs, he exclaims, blushing. 1,000 apologies. Oh, dear, oh, dear. It's because he bumped the hat in the door. Mr. Webster B. Willow don't look much older than my brother Harold. The fine blonde hair on his narrow chin hasn't decided if it wants to be a beard, and his eyes are so close together it looks like he's studying his nose or trying to see around it. Mostly, he seems to be upset about forgetting to take off his hat like a gentleman does when entering the house, and he looks like he wants to leave the room and try again. "Oh, never mind the hat, Webster," says Mr. Brewster impatiently. "The hat is of no consequence. Come in, come in. I want thee to meet Homer Figg. He will be in thy charge." "Oh, splendid, wonderful. How do you do, sir?" he says, grabbing my hand and shaking it without actually looking at me. "Oh, wonderful opportunity, splendid." He fidgets nervously with his dented hat while Mr. Brewster explains that we shall journey by train to Portland and from there take an overnight steamship to New York. We can't be exactly sure where or when Homer's brother has been assigned, Mr. Brewster says. It is likely that all the new recruits will be sent to encampments in New York or New Jersey, and from there dispatched to the field of battle. Is that clear? "Field of battle, yes," says Mr. Willow. "Thee will have to make inquiries once thee has reached New York," Mr. Brewster says, focusing upon the young clergyman. That means you'll have to ask questions. "I will provide thee with letters of introduction to newspaper editors, should that be useful, and to the local elders of my church. But thee will have to use thine own ingenuity to accomplish this task. Understood?" "Oh, ingenuity," says Mr. Willow. "Indeed." "Thee must be clear in thy purpose, Webster, lest thee be mistaken for a spy." Because he'll be asking questions about where the army recruits are. If he's not careful and clear about why he's trying to find out the information, he might be assumed to be a spy. Kind of like the Copperheads from Iron Thunder. The idea alarms Mr. Willow. Spy? Oh, they hang spies, don't they?" "Indeed they do," says Mr. Brewster gravely. "But thee will not be spying. Thee are simply inquiring as to the whereabouts of an underage soldier who was taken into the army on a ruse. Thee will secure his release by legal means." Mr. Brewster makes it sound pretty easy. All we have to do is go someplace and ask some questions, and my brother will be released from the army. The next day, after a long carriage ride to the station, me and Mr. Willow find ourselves in a Boston and Maine railroad car, bound for Portland. Trains are still a relatively new invention at this time, so most people would not have had a chance to ride one, and they're still going to be amazed by the speed at which it travels. I find that kind of funny now compared to how we travel by car and faster. While the locomotive sits at the station building up steam, we wait on seats made from varnished oak. Everybody is dressed up like they're on their way to church. Women with long starched dresses and bonnets tied under their chins, and men in black wool suits storing their tall hats on a special rack above their heads, and a conductor in a fine uniform collecting tickets. "Steam up in 10 minutes, ladies and gentlemen," he calls out. "Steam up in 10. Take your seats. Take your seats, if you please." Mr. Willow is feeling a bit nervous and confides that he has never been to Portland, let alone New York. "Truth is, I have never been on a train and have never seen a steamship with my own eyes." I tell him not to feel bad. Until a few days ago, I had never been anywhere but Pine Swamp, and once to Skowhegan for the state fair. "How far is it to Portland?" I want to know. Mr. Willow has no idea, so I ask the conductor. 38 miles station to station," he announces, sounding very pleased with himself. "Time of travel approximately 1.5 hours. "Almost 40 miles and we'll be there in less than 2 hours? That's faster than a racehorse can run flat out. And a horse can't run but a few miles before he needs to rest." But when I try to discuss the subject of speed in horses and trains, which is really quite interesting, Mr. Willow says he feels faint. "I am distinctly indisposed," he complains in a sickly voice. "I must be ill from the motion. Rail sickness, they call it." "We're not moving yet, Mr. Willow," I point out. He does look pale, but when the whistle blows and the train lurches forward, Mr. Willow recovers some of his good spirits. I like the next part because it actually takes like the rhythm of the train. It's very cool. Buildings and trees and telegraph poles begin to rush by the windows, and the wheels start ticking against the rails in a kind of pleasant, peaceful way. Not so very bad," he says, looking pleasantly surprised. "Indeed not." Well, now that he's feeling better, Mr. Willow wants to talk about himself. He tells me all about the little school where he pursued his Bible studies, the prizes he won for quoting scripture, and how he had the good fortune to meet Jedediah Brewster, who has taken him under his wing and is helping him to find a position. "I am not presently affiliated with any particular congregation," he confides. "I am open to possibilities. Indeed. The way he talks, Mr. Willow believes that helping me rescue my brother is a kind of a test, and if he passes, Mr. Brewster will find him a congregation. "A great man has given me his trust, and I shall not let him down," he announces, very solemn. After a while, Mr. Willow's voice kind of blends into the sound of the wheels clicking against the rails. It's amazing what goes by on the windows on a train. Farms and fields and forests and rows of wooden houses and big brick mills, like we're floating through a storybook, and each turn in the track is a new page, and it's a story I never heard before, so I don't know how it will end. Page after page, picture after picture, and always something new around the corner, and the chugging of the locomotive belching black smoke, making its own dark clouds against the sky, and the steam whistle sounding alive somehow, and the whole train is saying, "Here I am, make way, chugga chugga, woo woo, here I am, make way, chugga chugga, woo woo," and rocking me to sleep. When I wake up, we're in Portland. And that's where the trouble really starts.